Let's start the blockchain basics course. So today, what we're going to discuss? Well, let's first start with what is proof of stake. By a formal definition, again, proof of stake are a class of consensus mechanisms for blockchains that work by selecting validators in proportion to their quantity of holdings in the associated cryptocurrency. Now, this is a very, very general definition, and proof of stake is very diverse because, well, it essentially is like very new in comparison to proof of work. So, in a way, we are kind of figuring it out, right? We are trying to see what works and what doesn't. Well, what does this definition mean? Now, remember one thing about proof of work. We need to make our system hard to be manipulated, right? In proof of work, this is addressed using hash functions and trusting like the book, remember, with the most computational work. That makes our system very demanding in terms of energy. Well, how does proof of stake address like this issue of being hard to manipulate? What if, instead of trusting computational work, we selected people randomly to validate transactions with the probability of them being chosen proportional to the amount of coins they hold, or stake, as we call it. We can also make the people that are not chosen attest those transactions as valid. So, imagine I have a pool of many people with different amount of coins. Imagine, for example, I have like 3 coins staked and Pete has 2. Then I have like a 3 over 5, 60% chance of being selected as the validator, and Pete attests that my validation was correct, and Pete has a 2 over 5 or 40% chance of being selected as a validator, and I attest if his validation is correct. Well, how can we even define a stake? How can we define the odds the person has? There are many different ways, right? And this is like correlated to the whole we are figuring it out part of proof of stake. We can just count the balance of coins one has, like just how many coins they have, period. We can count the balance times the age of coins. So like a newcomer that just bought a lot, they don't have as much power as someone who had a lot but from the start. Or we can count coins that the person has to lock and they cannot move for a certain period of time. Well, and why so many ways? Each one has its own strengths and flaws, right? For example, if you just count coins, this is more accessible, but it can become very easily very centralized, right? So an institution comes in and buys a lot of the coins, and suddenly now we have a very centralized network, like they have all the power. When locked coins can prevent manipulation in the sense that institutions will have a harder time like controlling on a market, but it also sucks liquidity out of the market, right? Because if these coins are locked, then they cannot be sold, and if I need to buy and there's no one selling, then the exchange is not liquid, right? Now, again, as I have said, now let me just move a little bit. Record this, you can read too. Proof of stake is young, right? It's not as old as Bitcoin or not as old as proof of work in general, and it has not like withstood as many attacks, and we have not seen if it is as safe as proof of work is. Now, how can we prevent a malicious action in our network with proof of stake? This is a very, very particular thing to proof of stake, because if you do an attack using like the miners from proof of work, like the computers that are mining the proof of work currency, if you try to do an attack and you fail, like there are basically no consequences, right? We cannot just say, well, I'm going to destroy your machines. But in proof of stake, since you're holding coins, we can, for example, just tries to like confiscate part or even all of your stake if you try to attack our network, right? Well, how can we determine malicious? Okay, we know a few things are bad, right? We know double spending is bad, like you make a non-existent transaction. We know that if you are a validator and you go offline, you cause instability on the network, and that is bad too. And if you attest to false transactions, that is double spends or any other thing like that, you are also making something malicious in the network. Now, if you do those things, you are a malicious actor in the sense that you did something bad, right? But sometimes you can even do this like not on purpose if you're not very educated in proof of, like setting the whole nodes and validator stuff. So what do we have now? Our system is less demanding in terms of energy, since we don't need like fast and powerful computers running at the max speed they can all time of the day. And our network is still secure. Like if we were to be attacked, someone would need a huge sum of money to attack us, and we can even penalize the attackers, right? So, for example, let's say my network has 15 million, right? That is a relatively low amount if we're talking in terms of crypto. Like Bitcoin is almost 1 trillion market cap. But let's say our network is worth 50 million. Therefore, for someone to do a 51% attack on it, they would need like more than $25 million. If they do a double spend, like a false transaction, that is less than the amount we would penalize them, they will not be in profit. So if we like institute a penalty of 20% even, which is kind of low if the person is trying to override their network, if we institute like 20% as a penalty and they need 25 million, then they need to do at least a 5 million double spend to even break even, right? They're not even turning any profits. So in this sense, it's very secure. But there are also drawbacks, right? The network can become relatively centralized. Like the more money is the network is based on the people that have the most money. So few people that have a lot staked and they control the network. And it can be less safe in a few ways, since becoming a validator doesn't require as much technical knowledge, right? If you're just counting the amount of coins I have and I just like set up my laptop to do the validation, since it doesn't require a powerful computer, this person is more likely to be like a victim of social engineering hacks, right? So for example, those emails that have malicious links and anything like that, we are used to seeing this as like just an old lady would fall for it, but in reality, like many YouTubers even that are very tech savvy, they are like victims of scams. I think recently even a YouTuber that exposed scams, he got scammed, and the scammer I think made him delete his channel. So any questions about the proof of stake part before we talk about mining? Nope? Okay. Yeah, please say. What do you mean? So, like, what we usually see as staking isn't really staking. Like, you mean those smart contracts, right? Like, for example, Cake, you do it on PancakeSwap and you have like a 300% APY. This is not like proof of stake staking, right? You are not like validating transactions with your coins. But if you are doing the stake in proof of stake, what you're doing actually is like you will either like give your coins for someone like an organization you trust. There are many in Cardano, and Ethereum will have proof of stake soon. So you are attributing, like, say for example, you have 2 coins, right? 2 Ethereum. That is not enough for you to run your own node, your own validation node. You need at least 32 Ethereum to do that. But you can then give those 2 coins to someone or an organization, right? And that person will do the whole validation part. They will set up like a computer that runs all day, but it doesn't need to be a very powerful computer. And that computer will validate the transactions, right? And please note that usually those proof of stake operations really they don't pay much money. They are like 10, maybe 15% a year, right? Did you get what I said? So with smart contracts, right, like Cake and those things, you are always vulnerable to the code. If the code is like poorly written or has an exploit or anything like that, a hacker can go there and just hack. But if you're doing like the validation part, you're excluding those social engineering hacks. You are relatively safe. Okay. All right. Now let's look a bit into. Oh, sorry. Any other questions? Okay. Let's go and see what is mining. Now let's remember a few things again. Proof of work mining can be very resource intensive, right? The only way we can find that special number in each block is through trial and error until we get the desired result. There is no other way. We just have to try and try and try again. This can be very expensive, right? You have as the network grows, you need more computational power, and that can be very expensive in terms of energy. A more powerful computer needs more energy, right? And also, a more powerful computer is more expensive to buy. Well, how do we get people to mine then? If it's so expensive, how do we incentivize people to mine? We can pay transaction fees to the miner that validated the block containing our transactions, which is like gas fees, and I'll explain that a little bit better later. But we can also code in our system a reward for the miner whenever they can find that special number that took so much work. This way, we incentivize mining without increasing those transaction fees. We just create a token and give to the miner, so no one has paid for the token, right? Okay. But how does that reward work? It depends for each blockchain, okay? Doge, for example, at the start, it was completely random for the rewards. If you mine the block, the amount you receive could be like 10 Doge, or it could be like 10 billion Doge. So you could be very rich today if you just set up a PC very, very many years ago and just had luck. For BTC, for Bitcoin, the reward decreases every 210,000 blocks. This is what we call the halving. You may have heard that term around. For Ethereum, it's a fixed reward of 2 Ethereum per block, like perpetually, until the transition to proof of stake. Currently, Ethereum is proof of work. Okay. Now, how do we control those token emissions? I mean, I cannot have like a bunch of computers just running through the network and then suddenly Bitcoin, since the amount just decreases with time, I can have a bunch of computers and suddenly all the Bitcoin in the world is mine, right? So remember one thing about those numbers. We can control the difficulty of finding that special number by adjusting the number of leading zeros it has to have. So, for example, if it has to have 30 zeros, the chance of finding that number is 1 divided by 2 to the power of 30, about 1 in a billion. So by 2 to the 40 is about 1 in a trillion, if I'm not mistaken. And so it goes. But we can monitor the time it took to find that number, and then we adjust the difficulty based on a specific target. So, for example, for Bitcoin, each block has a target of 10 minutes. So if it goes more than 10 minutes, then the difficulty is decreased. If it goes less than 10 minutes, then the difficulty is increased. This way, we don't keep minting lots of tokens, and our token is not like hyperinflationary. we are not like the US dollar, right? We are not printing tokens as we wish. Also, one thing that's very interesting is that many people think that when all Bitcoin is mined, right? So if you go back, you'll see if it decreases, sorry, I think the laser version, so it should be better. Okay. So it decreases a bit every 200,000. So Bitcoin is finite, right? You may have heard the 21 million Bitcoin max supply. This comes from this property, that the reward is decreased every 210,000 bucks. And after that, many people think that Bitcoin will just disappear, but the miners will actually keep receiving those transaction fees. So if it's still profitable with the mining fees, and it can easily be, then Bitcoin will continue working, right? Okay. This is what I explained, that the Bitcoin has a 21 million fixed supply. The initial reward per block was 50 Bitcoin. Then we already had like 4 halvings, I think, and now it's like 6.25 Bitcoin per block. If you do the math, you'll see the block rules is, after a while, it's effectively 0, right? So from 6.25, it goes to 3.7 something, and there it goes. Okay. So, what can we use to mine? As I said last class, you can mine cryptocurrency even with the simplest computers. There are people that manage to run the algorithm because it's a very simple algorithm, actually, with a Game Boy. Okay, but your chance to actually get any reward with a computer this bad is very small. With a Game Boy, is essentially impossible, right? You can then join your power with many other miners across the world, right? And you split the reward whenever you get a block. These are what we call mining tools. So, what are those weird computers we can see that are used for mining? This Antminers and ASICs and such. Application-specific integrated circuits, what we call ASICs, are computers that are made with a single purpose: run a task with max efficiency. In the context of Bitcoin mining, their purpose is to only perform the SHA-256 function. They cannot be used for anything else. So it's not like a computer that you mine for a little bit when you're not using it, and then you can just use the computer normally. This machine cannot do anything but mine Bitcoin. So, ASICs also have a few drawbacks, okay? Since they are made for just doing a single task, regular computers have a really, really hard time competing with them. They are so much more energetically efficient that a regular computer just won't turn a profit if the difficulty is adjusted to the ASIC power. If they become prevalent, the hardware needed to mine in the blockchain that they became prevalent can become very, very expensive. And also, as difficulty is adjusted, as new machines start coming out, they just become obsolete very, very fast. I was researching for a bit, and I think an Antminer, which is very expensive, it's like top of the line. They are considered like the best of the world. And if you bought like the best a few years back, like 3, maybe 4 years ago, today that machine would not be turning a profit. The machine would actually be losing money if you accounted for like the energy costs, unless you were like in some very specific parts of the world where the energy is very cheap. Many cryptocurrencies have then mechanisms that try to prevent such machines from being able to mine efficiently, which can make the network less decentralized. So if anyone can, with their own PC, mine that cryptocurrency and they can turn a little bit of a profit, then the network is very spread throughout the world. And if a country decides to, for example, China, as we've all seen, if a country decides to shut down Bitcoin mining, then it doesn't have a big impact on the network. Well, let's talk about GPU mining then. For the blockchains that have anti-ASICs mechanism built in, the people usually use the graphics cards in their computer, like the cards here. Not the CPU, not the processor, but the graphics card. Why? Because those graphics cards can perform many operations in parallel. And therefore, they're more efficient than CPUs for this purpose, because all we are doing is running the same algorithm over and over and over and over until we get the right number. Okay? However, this can lead to a general lack of supply for those GPUs, for those graphics cards. Graphics cards like that were originally launched with a price of $250 were selling as high as $500 to $600 when the cryptocurrencies were at its peak. Okay, because everyone was buying and there was not enough to sell, and they cannot just make more because the parts that are used to make the graphics card are very, very hard to come by. It requires a lot of work. Okay. Now let's make a comparison from proof of work to proof of stake. Remember, like, proof of stake is way less resource intensive. It doesn't require nearly as many like computer power. Okay, you can run it in a very simple computer or laptop. Instead of competing for the most efficient and powerful machine, the validators are chosen at random. Okay, and this doesn't require super powerful computers, so the rewards can be smaller while still being good enough to incentivize people to become validators. So if I'm not spending like $1,000 in electricity to the end of the month, I don't need to make $1,000 from my mining. Okay, so this can even make our max supply decrease with time if the tokens get burned. So for example, with Ethereum, we recently had that upgrade in the network that decided that a part of the transaction fee you pay would be burned and just would get out of the market. And if you combine that with the proof of stake that doesn't require as many tokens minted to be like still a stable network, then the max supply could, instead of like the max supply steadily increasing, which is the case now for Ethereum, it starts to decrease with time. There's a very cool website that you can check that in. The site is called ultrasound.finance, ultrasound money, something like that. You can search for it, and it's like the first result on Google, and it just shows like with the burning upgrade, the slope of the curve is a little less inclined, and after the proof of stake starts to decrease. Okay, so any questions about that part, about mining? No questions? Okay. Let's talk then about what are gas fees, those things we hate to pay that are very expensive in Ethereum. So we know that resources are scarce. Okay, every transaction requires a little bit of computational work, and in proof of work especially, like the work you need can become very, very expensive really quick if you add up like all the operations you have to do. If we create a fee for every transaction, we can allocate our resources more efficiently, right? Because if we don't, then spammers and attackers would be very compelled. Like, it would be very easy to just spam a bunch of transactions and just solve the network if you wanted to. And if you like create a fee, then those spammers and attackers, they cannot do that. They would just have to pay a lot of money to do that, and that's not viable. Okay. So how does the whole gas fees thing work? Well, let's first understand Gwei. I'm talking here about the Ethereum gas schemes, because it's like, if you understand it, you can understand all the other like gas fees schemes, basically. One Gwei is like 10 to the power of minus 9 Ethereum, or about 0.0000000001 Ethereum. Think of it like cents, right? So 100 cents equals $1, and 1 billion Gwei equals 1 Ethereum. Since gas fees are calculated based on how much computational effort is expended to complete a transaction, the more complex the transaction is, the more gas it will require, right? That's very easy to imagine. Okay, so how is the gas fee calculated? Each operation has its own associated gas cost, each operation that you want to do in the blockchain. For example, if we just want to add two numbers, it costs 3 gas, which is imaginary unit, it does not mean anything like concretely, and sending a transaction costs 21,000 gas. Then the user, like you would select a limit to how much GUI per gas they want to spend. So, for example, let's say I want to pay a maximum of 20 GUI per gas, and the maximum is hit. It hits perfectly the maximum I established. So 20 GUI times 21,000 equals 0.00042 Ethereum, and say one Ethereum is approximately $3,000, then this user has spent approximately $1.26 in gas fees. That seems like a dream in Ethereum nowadays, right? We all know the gas fees are super high, but well, how is the whole how much GUI you pay per gas calculated? Well, if you're a miner, like it's only sensible that you give priority to the transactions that input a higher gas limit. Right? If the person is wanting to pay more, why would you do the transaction of someone that wants to pay less? What happens then is a sort of auction, like where the highest bids get their transaction added to the blockchain, and so it goes. So the one that wants to pay the most, then the second, third, and there it goes. If you want the transaction to get validated quicker, you set a higher gas limit, right? So that's what those buttons in MetaMask, they have like fast, moderate, instant, slow. That's what the buttons do. They do the calculations automatically to know what gas fees you need to pay to get the transaction in each time. And well, that's about it. Any questions? Guys, are you still with me? Anyone? Uh, okay. Okay. Well, then I think I can stop the recording.